It was a warm Saturday night in June when the local rodeo rolled through our small town of Oak Ridge. The fairgrounds had been transformed into a spectacle of dust, glory, and adrenaline for the weekend, with cowboys from across 3 states competing for both prize money and bragging rights. I'd spent the day watching bull riders get thrown like rag dolls, barrel racers cutting impossibly tight turns, and ropers demonstrating the kind of precision that comes from years of practice. The air had been thick with the scent of livestock, leather, and fried food, a combination that somehow works when you're caught up in the excitement of it all. By the time the final event ended and the floodlights dimmed over the arena, everyone was riding high on the collective energy that only comes from a day of spectacular performances and near misses. I'm Luke Bennett, by the way, 32 years old, owner of the most popular coffee shop in town, and definitely not the kind of guy who normally finds himself hosting impromptu after-parties for rodeo cowboys. I've lived in Oak Ridge my whole life, except for the 4 years I spent getting my business degree in Portland. I came back home with big city ideas but small-town values, opened Timber Brew 5 years ago, and it's been the center of my world ever since. I've always loved rodeo season. It brings in good business and fresh faces, but I usually experience it from behind my espresso machine, serving up caffeine to bleary-eyed competitors in the early morning hours before they head to the arena. So how did I end up with my kitchen full of cowboys at midnight? Blame it on my best friend Mia, who bartends at the Watering Hole, the local dive that typically hosts the unofficial rodeo after-parties. A burst pipe had flooded the bar earlier that day, and Mia, in her infinite wisdom, had volunteered my place as an alternative venue without actually asking me first. "Your house is the biggest," she'd texted, "and you're always complaining you don't meet enough new people." Before I could type back a firm rejection, she'd already given my address to half the rodeo circuit. I barely had time to straighten up my living room before the first truck started pulling into my driveway. I live a little ways out of town in my grandparents' old farmhouse. Plenty of space for parking and neighbors far enough away that noise complaints wouldn't be an issue. Still, as I watched the parade of dusty boots cross my threshold, I wondered what I'd gotten myself into. That's when I first saw him. He ducked through my front door with the kind of confidence that makes a room shift its attention, like gravity had suddenly changed direction. Tall, taller than me by a good 3 inches, which put him around 6 feet 3 inches, with shoulders that filled out his western shirt in ways that made my mouth go dry. His Stetson was pushed back slightly, revealing tousled dark hair and the kind of tan that comes from actual work under the sun, not salon beds. But it was his eyes that caught me off guard, bright blue against his bronzed skin, crinkled at the corners from squinting into the distance, or maybe just from smiling too much. "Hope you don't mind us crashing your place," he said, extending a hand that was calloused and warm. "I'm Jackson Reeves. Everyone calls me Jax." I introduced myself, trying not to notice how his handshake lingered a beat longer than necessary, or how his gaze seemed to take in every detail of my face. He was the kind of handsome that made you forget what you were saying mid-sentence, and I was embarrassingly aware of my faded jeans and simple Henley shirt compared to his pressed Western wear and silver belt buckle, evidence of some past championship. "Nice place you've got," he said, glancing around at the exposed beams and stone fireplace. "Reminds me of my granddad's ranch in Wyoming." Before I could respond, Mia appeared at my elbow, already 3 drinks in and glowing with the satisfaction of her matchmaking scheme. "Luke, I see you've met Jax. He won the bull riding competition today. Stayed on thunderclap for the full 8 seconds when nobody else could manage 3. "Impressive," I said, genuinely meaning it. I'd seen that particular bull earlier in the day, a mountain of muscle with a mean streak wider than the Mississippi. "Just lucky," Jax replied with a humility that seemed genuine. "Right place, right time, right bull." "And right cowboy," Mia added with a wink that was about as subtle as a rodeo clown. I shot her a warning glance, but she just grinned and disappeared into the growing crowd. The party quickly took on a life of its own. Someone had brought a portable speaker, and soon the living room was filled with the sounds of country music and laughter. I moved through my own home feeling strangely like a visitor, pouring drinks and making small talk with people I'd never met before. But my eyes kept finding their way back to Jax, who seemed equally aware of my presence. Whenever our gazes met across the room, he'd tip his hat slightly or raise his beer bottle in acknowledgement, a small private gesture in the midst of the chaos. As the night wore on, The party naturally migrated toward the kitchen, as parties always do. My kitchen is the heart of the house, with a large island in the center and plenty of counter space. I'd renovated it myself last year, replacing the outdated appliances and worn countertops with modern equivalents that still respected the farmhouse aesthetic. It was my favorite room, the place where I experimented with new coffee blends and pastry recipes for the shop, and now it was filled with strangers passing around bottles and sharing stories. I was leaning against the refrigerator, half listening to a conversation about breeding stock, when Jax appeared beside me. He'd removed his hat, and his hair was slightly mussed, giving him a softer, more approachable look. "Your friends throw a hell of a party," he said, his shoulder brushing against mine as he reached past me for a beer from the cooler. "They're not really my friends," I admitted. "Most of these people I just met tonight." "Including me?" His smile was teasing, but there was something else in his expression, a genuine interest that made my heart beat a little faster. "Especially you," I replied, trying to match his easy confidence. "I think I'd remember meeting someone like you before." "Someone like me?" He raised an eyebrow, amusement playing across his features. I felt my cheeks warm. "You know what I mean. Professional bull rider. Championship buckle. Not exactly the usual clientele at my coffee shop." "Ah, so you own that place in town, Timber something?" "I stopped in this morning. Best Americano I've had in months." The fact that he'd been in my shop, that I might have even served him without realizing it, created an odd sense of connection. "Thanks. It's kind of my pride and joy. I can tell. You've got the same look talking about coffee that my dad gets talking about his prize stallions." He laughed, a deep sound that seemed to resonate in my chest. Passionate. The way he said that last word made the kitchen suddenly feel warmer. Our conversation flowed easily after that, moving from coffee to rodeo circuits to growing up in small towns. He'd been raised on a ranch in Wyoming, but had been traveling the rodeo circuit for the past 8 years. He spoke about the places he'd seen with a quiet appreciation that made me envious of his experiences. "Don't get me wrong," he said. "There's something special about having roots like you do. Sometimes living out of a truck and hotel rooms gets old. And yet you keep doing it," I observed. He shrugged, those impressive shoulders rising and falling beneath his shirt. "The road gets in your blood. And there's nothing like those 8 seconds on the back of something that badly wants you off it. Makes you feel alive." I could understand that, the addiction to adrenaline, to pushing limits. I'd had my own version during my college years in Portland, though it had involved very different kinds of risks. Our conversation was interrupted when someone cranked up the music, and a cheer went through the kitchen as people cleared space for impromptu dancing. Jax and I found ourselves pressed closer together as the crowd shifted around us. The proximity was dizzying. I could smell the subtle notes of his cologne mixed with leather and the faint trace of arena dust. "You don't seem entirely comfortable with all this," he observed, his voice lowered to be heard over the music. "Is it that obvious?" I smiled ruefully. "I'm not usually the party host type. More of a quiet dinner with friends kind of guy." "Nothing wrong with that," he said, "though I'm selfishly glad you made an exception tonight." Before I could respond, a petite blonde in tight jeans and cowboy boots appeared at Jax's side, tugging at his arm. "Come on, champ. You promised me a dance." Her words were slightly slurred, her smile wide and inviting. Jax glanced at me, something like regret flickering across his face. "Rain check?" he asked, and I nodded, trying not to feel disappointed as he allowed himself to be pulled toward the makeshift dance floor. I busied myself cleaning up empty bottles and refreshing snack bowls, falling into the familiar role of caretaker that I perfected at the coffee shop. From the corner of my eye, I watched Jax dancing. He moved with the same fluid confidence he seemed to bring to everything, leading his partner with gentle guidance. When the song ended, he smiled politely at the blonde, but didn't stay for another dance. Instead, he made his way back through the crowd toward me. "Sorry about that," he said. "Cassidy's dad sponsors half the riders on the circuit. It's kind of an unwritten rule that you don't turn down a dance when she asks." "No need to explain," I said, though I was pleased he had. "It's a party. People dance." "Do you?" he asked, eyes twinkling with challenge. I laughed. "Not if I can help it. 2 left feet and no sense of rhythm." "I doubt that," he said, and there was something in his tone that made me feel like we weren't just talking about dancing anymore. The night continued, and somehow Jax and I kept finding our way back to each other's company. We'd drift apart as social obligations pulled us in different directions, but inevitably, we'd end up side by side again, picking up our conversation as if there had been no interruption. It was past midnight when things took a turn I hadn't expected. The party had thinned somewhat, with the less serious drinkers heading back to hotels or campers at the fairgrounds. Those who remained had settled into the comfortable haze of late-night drinking, voices slightly too loud, laughter coming easily. I was rinsing glasses in the sink when I felt a presence behind me. Without turning, I knew it was Jack's. There was something distinctive about the way he occupied space. "Need a hand?" he asked, reaching around me to place his empty bottle on the counter. "I'm good," I said, turning to face him. "Just trying to stay ahead of the mess." We were standing close, closer than we had been all night. In the relative quiet of this corner of the kitchen, with the party continuing around us, but somehow separate, I could see details I'd missed before. A small scar above his right eyebrow, the faint stubble darkening his jaw, the way his eyes weren't just blue but had flecks of gray near the pupils. "You know," he said, his voice lower now, "I almost didn't come tonight. Was planning to just crash at the motel, get an early start tomorrow. I've got a competition in Boise next weekend." "What changed your mind?" I asked, aware of how still I was standing, as if any sudden movement might break whatever was building between us. "Heard there was this local guy with the best coffee in 3 states who might be at the party." His smile was slow, deliberate. "Thought it might be worth checking out." "And was it?" My voice came out steadier than I felt. Instead of answering, he reached up with one hand and gently tipped my chin with his thumb and forefinger, the gesture reminiscent of how a cowboy might tip the brim of his hat in greeting. It was such an unexpected motion, playful yet unmistakably intimate, that I felt it like an electric current running from my chin down to my toes. "I'd say so," he murmured, his eyes holding mine with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. For a moment, we stood frozen in that tableau, the sounds of the party fading to background noise. I was acutely aware of his thumb still resting lightly against my chin, of how little distance separated us, of the decision hanging in the air between us. Then someone dropped a bottle, the sound of shattering glass breaking the spell. We both stepped back, the moment not gone but paused, like a held breath. "I should probably." I gestured vaguely toward the broken glass. "Yeah, of course," he said, running a hand through his hair. "Let me help." We cleaned up the mess together, working in a companionable silence that hummed with unspoken possibilities. As we finished, he leaned close again, his voice for my ears only. "I'm not leaving town until tomorrow afternoon. Any chance I could get another cup of that famous coffee in the morning?" The invitation was clear, the ball now in my court. I thought about my usual Sunday routine, sleeping in, maybe catching up on paperwork for the shop, a quiet day to recharge. Then I thought about Jax, about the way he'd tipped my chin like a hat, about the connection that had sparked between us over the course of one unexpected night. "The shop's closed Sundays," I said, watching his expression carefully. "But I make a pretty decent brew here at home, too." His smile was slow and genuine, reaching all the way to those crinkled corners of his eyes. "I was hoping you might say that." As the night progressed, the party continued to thin out. Mia, in her infinite wisdom or perhaps drunken perception, seemed to sense the shift between Jax and me. She made a show of organizing rides for the remaining guests, shooting me meaningful glances that I pretended not to understand. By 2 in the morning, the house had emptied except for Mia, who was passed out on my couch, and Jax, who had stayed to help with the final cleanup. We moved around the kitchen in comfortable synchronicity, bagging trash and loading the dishwasher. There was something intimate about the domesticity of it, about sharing this mundane task in the quiet aftermath of chaos. Occasionally our hands would brush or our shoulders would touch, each contact a small reminder of the current running between us. "You didn't have to stay and help," I said as I wiped down the counter. "I'm sure you're tired after competing all day." "I wanted to," he replied simply. He was leaning against the island, watching me with those intent blue eyes. "Besides, seemed like the least I could do after invading your home." "You were invited," I reminded him. "Well, not by me initially, but you know what I mean." "And are you glad I came?" he asked, the question hanging in the air between us. I set down the dishcloth and met his gaze directly. "Yes," I said honestly. "I am." He pushed off from the island and moved toward me, his steps deliberate. When he reached me, He didn't touch me right away, just stood close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him. "I'm leaving tomorrow," he said, his voice low. "Back on the road. That's my life. Different town every weekend, never staying in one place too long." "I know," I said, understanding what he was telling me. This wasn't the beginning of something lasting. It couldn't be, given our different lives. But it could be something meaningful for the time we had. "But I'd like to see you again before I go," he continued. "And maybe when the circuit brings me back this way next year." "I'd like that too," I admitted, surprised by how much I meant it. This time when he reached for me, it wasn't just my chin he touched. His hand cupped my jaw, thumb brushing lightly across my cheekbone. I leaned into the contact, giving him the permission he seemed to be waiting for. When his lips met mine, it was gentle at first, a question more than a demand. I answered by stepping closer, my hands finding their way to his waist, feeling the solid warmth of him beneath my palms. The kiss deepened, becoming something hungry and honest. His other arm wrapped around my back, pulling me against him until there was no space left between us. I could taste the faint bitterness of beer on his tongue, could feel the slight roughness of stubble against my skin. It was intoxicating. This connection that had built over hours of conversation now expressed in the language of touch. When we finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, he rested his forehead against mine. "I've been wanting to do that since I walked through your door," he confessed. "What took you so long?" I teased, feeling lighter than I had in months. He laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest against mine. "Had to make sure you wouldn't throw me out on my ass. I've been bucked off enough things today." We stayed like that for a moment, sharing the same air, neither wanting to be the first to step away. Finally, I said, "It's late. Or early, depending on how you look at it." "Are you kicking me out?" he asked, his eyes searching mine. I shook my head. "No, but I am suggesting we might be more comfortable somewhere other than standing in my kitchen." His smile was slow and full of promise. "Lead the way." That night with Jax was unexpected in every way, not just the physical connection, which was undeniably powerful, but the emotional one that seemed to form so quickly between us. In the quiet hours before dawn, lying beside him in my bed, I found myself sharing things I rarely talked about. My parents' difficulty accepting my sexuality, my dreams for expanding the coffee shop, the loneliness that sometimes crept in despite being surrounded by people every day. He listened with genuine interest, offering his own stories in return. The pressure of family expectations to take over the ranch instead of playing cowboy on the rodeo circuit, the toll that constant travel took on relationships, the thrill and terror of riding animals that could kill you if you made a single mistake. "It's strange," I said as early morning light began to filter through the curtains. "I've lived in this town my whole life, know most of the people in it, but sometimes I feel like no one really sees me. And then you walk in, a complete stranger, and in one night." "I see you, Luke," he said simply, his fingers tracing patterns on my shoulder. "I saw you the moment I walked in." We dozed off eventually, waking a few hours later to the sounds of Mia clattering around in the kitchen, making what she called her hangover cure breakfast. The smell of bacon and coffee filled the house, creating a sense of normality that contrasted with the extraordinary nature of the night before. Jax borrowed a clean t-shirt from me, though he put his jeans and boots back on. There was something strangely intimate about seeing him in my clothes, something that made my chest tighten with emotions I wasn't ready to name. When we emerged from the bedroom, Mia gave us a knowing look, but mercifully kept her comments to herself, simply sliding plates of food across the counter with a wink. The three of us ate breakfast together, the conversation easy and comfortable, as if this were a regular Sunday morning routine rather than the aftermath of a night that had changed something fundamental inside me. All too soon, it was time for Jax to leave. He had to get back to the fairgrounds, pack up his gear, and hit the road for Boise. I walked him to his truck, acutely aware that this might be the last time I saw him, despite our talk of next time. "So," he said, turning to face me beside his truck, "that coffee shop of yours, does it have a good memory for faces?" I smiled, understanding what he was really asking. "The best, especially faces it wants to see again." "Good to know." He reached out and tipped my chin again, the gesture now carrying a weight of shared history. "Because I have a feeling I'm going to need a lot of caffeine next time I'm in town." When he kissed me goodbye, it was both an ending and a promise, the conclusion of this unexpected interlude, and the possibility of something more in the future. I watched his truck pull away, dust rising from the driveway, until it disappeared down the road toward town. Back in the house, Mia was cleaning up the breakfast dishes, a knowing smile on her face. "So," she said, "I guess you're not mad at me anymore for volunteering your place last night?" I laughed, shaking my head. "Let's just say you're forgiven. This time." "He seems like a good one," she observed, her tone uncharacteristically serious. "Even if he's just passing through." "Yeah," I agreed, looking out the window toward the empty driveway. "He is." In the weeks that followed, Jax and I stayed in touch through texts and occasional late-night calls when he had service on the road. He sent me pictures from different rodeos, and I shared the daily happenings of Oak Ridge, mundane updates that somehow became meaningful in the sharing. It wasn't a relationship in any traditional sense, but it was something real, a connection that had sparked in my kitchen during an unexpected rodeo after-party and continued to burn despite the distance. I don't know what the future holds for us, whether his circuit will bring him back my way, whether what we started that night can grow into something more substantial. But I do know that sometimes the most significant moments in life come when you least expect them, like a rodeo after-party spilling into your kitchen, or a handsome cowboy tipping your chin like a hat. And I know that whatever happens, I'll never look at my kitchen the same way again. Total _char_count, 18,674.